My older brother abandoned me at age 10 when mom died. 15 years later, he came back begging for forgiveness. But I'd already found a new family, and what I told him left them speechless. I'm 28 years old. I work as a barista at an independent coffee shop downtown. And honestly, I need to tell this story because what happened a few months ago made something clear to me that I'd been trying to ignore for years. Like, that family doesn't always mean what people think it means. I guess I should start at the beginning, when I was 10 years old and my mom died in a car accident. I don't remember much about the funeral. Honestly, everything is kind of blurry in my memory, but what I do remember perfectly, with a clarity that still hurts, is sitting in my living room 3 days after the burial, with a social worker standing in front of me, explaining that I was going to have to go live with a temporary family because my brothers couldn't take care of me. Raymond was 23 at the time, already living on his own, had a stable job at a construction company. And when they asked him if he could keep me, he said no, that he had his own things, his own life. Eric was 19, in college, and basically said the same thing, that school was too important and he couldn't take care of a kid. That's when I understood, even though I didn't have the words to express it at the time, that I was completely alone. The first years in the foster care system were horrible, and when I say horrible, I'm not exaggerating to make it sound more dramatic, like they really were a nightmare. I went through 3 different homes in 4 years, families that basically just wanted the government check, you know? There was this lady, I won't say her name, who made me and 2 other kids sleep in the garage because she didn't want us dirtying the real bedrooms. My brothers called me once in a while at first, like once every 2 or 3 months, asking how I was, telling me things were going to get better, but they never talked about coming to visit me or getting me out of there. The calls became less frequent, like every 6 months, then once a year, and eventually they stopped calling completely. I think the last time I talked to Raymond was when I was 13. He called me on my birthday, but the conversation lasted literally 5 minutes. It was super awkward, him asking me generic things like he was talking to a stranger, and I guess in a way that's exactly what we were by that point. When I was 14, I was placed with Mrs. Robinson, and she changed everything. She was an older lady, like 60 years old, widowed, no kids of her own, and for some reason she decided she was going to dedicate the rest of her life to taking care of kids in the system. Her house was small but clean. It smelled like cinnamon and coffee all the time, and for the first time in 4 years, I felt like I was in a place where someone actually cared about me. She bought me new clothes for school. Not secondhand, she came to all my parent-teacher conferences. She taught me how to cook basic things. She helped me with homework even though she didn't always understand the advanced math. I stayed with her until I turned 18 and officially aged out of the foster care system. The day I left, she cried. She hugged me at her front door and told me I would always have a place there if I needed it, that I would never be alone as long as she was alive. I still call her every 2 weeks. At 18, I basically had nothing. Like, I had a high school diploma, $800 saved from part-time jobs, and a suitcase with my clothes. The government gives you a little support when you leave the system, but it's not much, and honestly, I had no idea what to do with my life. I tried going to community college for a semester, but I couldn't focus. I was working 40 hours a week at a supermarket just to pay rent on a tiny room I shared with 2 other people, and classes felt like something impossible to handle. I dropped out after 4 months. I worked at various places for the next 2 years, nothing special, cashier, dishwasher, delivery driver, anything that paid the bills. I wasn't miserable, but I wasn't happy either. I just existed. You know what I mean? I thought about my brothers all the time, about how they probably had normal lives, with decent jobs, maybe girlfriends or wives, and I was there struggling not to become homeless. When I was 20, I made a decision that changed everything. I decided to move to a completely different city, like 6 hours from where I'd grown up, without telling anyone except Mrs. Robinson. I packed my things, which basically fit in my car, a 2009 Honda Civic I'd bought for $3,000 that made weird noises, but worked, and I just left. I wanted to start over, like literally create a new life, where nobody knew my story, where I didn't have to explain why I didn't have family at holidays or why I never mentioned my brothers. I arrived in this city without a job, without an apartment, without a plan, really, just with the idea that I needed to get away from everything that reminded me of my childhood. The first months I slept in my car. I showered at the gym, where I'd bought the cheapest membership I could find, and I desperately looked for work. I got the job at the coffee shop, which is called Morning Grounds, and is owned by Mrs. Wong, a Korean lady about 50 years old, who makes the best latte I've ever had in my life. She hired me even without experience as a barista because, as she told me later, she saw something in me, a kind of determination or need that reminded her of when she had immigrated with nothing. The job was perfect for me. It paid decent with tips, the atmosphere was calm, and Mrs. Wong turned out to be one of the best people I've ever met. She taught me everything about coffee, about how to treat customers, about how to handle stress, and eventually she became something like a mentor. With my first paycheck, I rented a room in a shared apartment with 2 roommates who were almost never there. And for the first time in my life, I felt like a real adult, independent, doing things for myself. Things started to improve, gradually. After a year at the coffee shop, Mrs. Wong promoted me to assistant manager, which came with a raise and more responsibilities that I honestly loved. I started saving money for real for the first time. Not much, but something, with the vague idea of someday being able to open my own place. I made friends, people from work, and regular customers who became acquaintances. And although I never told them my complete story, they were good people who made life feel less lonely. I started going to the gym regularly, not because I wanted to look incredible, but because I needed something to help me process all the anger and pain I still carried inside. Basically, I was building the life I always wanted to have, you know? A simple life, but mine, without drama, without people failing me. When I was 22, I met Nicole. She came to the coffee shop every Tuesday and Thursday at like 7 inches the morning, always ordered a double Americano and a glazed donut, and was always reading science fiction, books while waiting for her order. We started talking. First about books because I also read a lot. Then about movies, music, basically about everything. She was an elementary school teacher. She loved kids. She was super optimistic and positive in a way that sometimes irritated me, but that also attracted me because she was the complete opposite of me. After like 3 months of these morning conversations, I finally asked for her number, and she said yes immediately, with a huge smile that made me feel something I hadn't felt in years, like hope maybe, or the possibility that someone could actually love me. Our relationship developed fast, maybe too fast looking back, but at the time, it felt perfect. Nicole was the type of person who makes plans for everything, who has framed photos in her apartment of her family, who talks to her parents every day. Her family was huge and close, like those families you see in movies where everyone gets together on Sundays to eat and they hug and laugh. At first, it was overwhelming for me, honestly. All those people asking me about my life, my parents, my brothers, and me trying to dodge the questions or give vague answers without sounding rude. I told Nicole my story after like 6 months of dating. One night we were at her apartment and she kept pushing me about why I never talked about my family. I told her everything. From my mom's death to foster care to the fact that I hadn't talked to my brothers in like 10 years. She cried. She hugged me. She told me she was so sorry and that I deserved better, and I thought I'd finally found someone who understood. After a year together, Nicole asked me to move in together. I was nervous because I'd never lived with a partner before, but I was also excited about the idea of having a real home, not just a room in a shared apartment with random people. We found a small but nice place, a 1-bedroom apartment in an old but well-maintained building with a decent kitchen and big windows. That let in a lot of light. Moving in with her was weird at first, like having to share space and negotiate who did what, but eventually we found a rhythm. She decorated the place. I cooked most nights. We watched series together on the couch we'd bought at a garage sale. I felt happier than I'd ever been, or at least that's what I believed at the time. Nicole's family adopted me, basically. Her parents invited me to all the family gatherings, they included me in photos, they asked my opinion about things. Her mom called me Mijo and made my favorite dish when we visited them. Her dad taught me how to fix things around the house and gave me tools he'd had stored away. They had 2 other daughters, Nicole's sisters, who also treated me well. They teased me like I was their brother. For the first time in my adult life, I felt part of something bigger than myself. And although part of me knew they weren't really my family, another part wanted to believe they could be. Nicole talked about getting married eventually, about having kids, about buying a house, and I let myself get carried away by those plans, even though deep down I was afraid that everything was too good to be true. Things started to change like 2 years into living together. One day I was working at the coffee shop. It was a normal Tuesday. I was making a cappuccino for a customer when my phone vibrated with a text message from a number I didn't recognize. I opened the message and it said, "Hey Isaac, this is Raymond. I know it's been a long time. I'd like to talk to you if you're willing. I have your number, thanks to Nicole." I felt like someone had thrown a bucket of ice water on me. I stood there, staring at my phone screen, reading the message over and over, trying to process it. Raymond. My brother, who I hadn't talked to in over 10 years. Who had abandoned me when I was 10 years old. Who never visited me even once when I was in foster care. And he had my number thanks to Nicole. I waited until I got home that night to confront Nicole about this. She was in the kitchen preparing dinner, singing something while cutting vegetables, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to break loose. I asked her directly, without beating around the bush, if she had given Raymond my number, and she turned around with a smile like it was the most normal thing in the world, and said, yes, that he had contacted her on Facebook like a month ago, that they'd been talking, that he really wanted to reconnect with me, and that she thought it would be good for me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told her, like almost yelling because I was so angry I couldn't control my voice. How she had dared to do that without asking me first, that she knew perfectly well what my brothers had done to me, that she had no right to make that decision for me. Nicole got defensive immediately. She started saying that family is important, that everyone makes mistakes, that maybe Raymond had changed, that I needed to give him a chance because holding on to so much resentment wasn't healthy. Basically, she gave me all the cliches that people say when they don't really understand what it's like to be abandoned by your family. I explained, trying to stay calm but failing miserably, that it wasn't just that they had made mistakes, it's that they left me alone when I needed them most, that they never tried to be in my life after that they had no right to show up now that I'd built something on my own. She insisted that she'd done it with good intentions, that she only wanted to help, that she thought it would make me happy. I told her that if she really knew me, she would know this was exactly the opposite of what would make me happy. The fight escalated. We both said hurtful things, and eventually I left to walk because I needed air and space to think. I walked for hours that night, literally until my feet hurt, processing what had happened. It wasn't just that Raymond had contacted Nicole and that she'd given him my number. It was that she had violated my trust in the most fundamental way possible. I had trusted her with my story, my traumas, my boundaries, and she had decided to ignore all of that because she thought she knew better than I did what I needed. I felt betrayed, completely betrayed, and the worst part is I knew she genuinely believed she was doing something good. But intention doesn't matter when the result is destroying someone's trust, you know? When I got home that night, like at 2 inches the morning, Nicole was awake waiting for me on the couch. She tried to apologize. She cried. She told me she hadn't understood how serious this was for me, but I'd already made a decision. I told her we needed to end the relationship, that I couldn't be with someone who didn't respect my boundaries. The next few days were horrible. Nicole tried to fix things. She begged me to reconsider. She told me she would cut contact with Raymond if that's what I wanted, but the damage was done. It wasn't about whether she kept talking to him or not. It was about the fact that she had demonstrated she didn't understand something fundamental about me and my life. I started looking for a new apartment immediately because I couldn't keep living there. Every corner of the place reminded me of her and how I'd thought I finally had a stable life. Mrs. Wong noticed something was wrong at work. I was distracted and quiet, and eventually I told her the basics. She didn't say much, just listened, and then told me that sometimes the people who love us most are the ones who hurt us most because they think they know what's best for us when they don't. 2 weeks after the breakup, I was working an afternoon shift at the coffee shop when Nicole's parents came in. It was super awkward, like you could cut the tension with a knife. Her dad asked me to talk to them outside when I had a break, and I didn't want to cause a scene at work, so I agreed. We went out to the alley, behind the coffee shop, and they basically told me I was being selfish, that Nicole was devastated, that she had only tried to help, that I was throwing away a perfect relationship out of pride. Her mom was crying, saying they considered me part of the family. How could I do this? I tried to explain my point of view, but it was useless. They only saw things from their daughter's perspective, and honestly, I don't blame them for that. But it also made it clear to me that I'd lost not just Nicole, but her entire family. The only thing that had felt like a real family to me in years. Like a week later, on a Saturday morning, someone knocked on my new apartment door. I had just moved in. I still had boxes everywhere. I hadn't even set up my bed yet and was sleeping on a mattress on the floor. I opened the door half asleep, assuming it was the landlord or some neighbor, and there was Raymond. I recognized him immediately, even though he'd changed. He had more weight, some gray hair, but his eyes were the same. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, smiling nervously, saying, "Hey, Isaac, long time no see." I felt like my brain had frozen. I didn't know what to say, what to do. Like my body was there, but my mind was somewhere else completely. He kept talking, saying he understood if I was angry, that he'd matured a lot in these years, that he'd been in therapy, that he regretted not being there for me, that he wanted to fix our relationship. I asked him how he'd gotten my address, and he got uncomfortable, said Nicole had given it to him before we broke up, that he'd been waiting for the right moment to show up. That made me even more furious. Like Nicole had been planning this family reunion without my consent for who knows how long. I told Raymond to leave, that I didn't want to have this conversation, that he'd had 15 years to try to be part of my life and he'd chosen not to. He insisted, saying he was young and stupid when Mom died, that he didn't know how to take care of a kid, that Eric and he had talked and they both wanted to reconnect with me. I told him I didn't care, that I'd learned to live without them, that I'd built my own life, and that I didn't need them showing up now with their late apologies. He looked hurt, which made me feel a weird mix of satisfaction and guilt, but I stood firm. I told him if he really respected me, he'd leave me alone, and I closed the door in his face. After that encounter, I felt worse than ever. Not only had I lost Nicole and her family, now I had my brothers trying to force themselves back into my life, and on top of that, I had to worry that Raymond knew where I lived. I decided to move again, to a different building on the other side of the city, and this time I didn't give my address to anyone except Mrs. Robinson and Mrs. Wong. I changed my phone number too, the same number I'd had for years, and I only gave it to the few people in my life who really mattered. I felt paranoid, like constantly looking over my shoulder wondering if Raymond or Eric were going to show up out of nowhere. It was emotionally exhausting, but it also made me realize something important. I didn't owe my brothers anything. Not my time, my attention, my forgiveness, nothing. They had made their choice when I was 10 years old, and I had every right to live my life without them. Things gradually improved again after that. I focused on work, on saving money, on taking care of myself. Mrs. Wong gave me more responsibilities at the coffee shop, and we started talking about the possibility of me buying the business from her eventually, like in about 5 years, when she wanted to retire. The idea excited me. Having my own business, being my own boss, creating something lasting. I started taking online classes about business administration. Nothing formal, but enough to learn the basics. I reconnected with Andre, a guy I'd known in one of my foster homes when we were teenagers. We'd lost touch for years, but I ran into him, by accident, at a concert. It turned out he'd also gone through similar experiences with his family, and having someone who really understood without me having to explain every detail was incredibly healing. Andre and I started hanging out regularly, like once a week, usually to grab a drink or just to talk. He worked in it, was doing well, had managed to build a stable life despite everything that had happened in his childhood. We talked about our experiences in the system, about how it had affected us, about the anger we still felt sometimes toward the people who were supposed to take care of us. But we also talked about the future, about our plans, about how we were going to make sure we never depended on anyone but ourselves. It wasn't a deep friendship in the traditional sense, like we didn't talk every day or know everything about each other's lives, but there was a mutual understanding that was worth more than any amount of time together. Like 3 months ago, I received a letter in the mail from Raymond. He'd sent the letter to Mrs. Robinson's address, and she forwarded it to me because she knew I'd want to decide whether to read it or not. The letter was long, like 5 pages handwritten, where Raymond explained his life over the last 15 years, his regrets, his therapy process, how he'd realized how much damage he'd done to Eric and me by not being there. He talked about how our mom would be disappointed in him, about how he'd been scared and selfish when he was young, about how now he had a son of his own and couldn't imagine abandoning him the way he abandoned me. The letter ended asking me to consider meeting him. No pressure, just a conversation where he could explain himself better and I could say everything I needed to say. I didn't respond to the letter. I put it in a drawer, and it's still there, because honestly, I don't know what to do with it. Part of me, a small but persistent part, wonders if I should give Raymond a chance, if maybe forgiveness would be liberating in some way. But the truth is, I don't feel like I need to forgive him to move forward with my life. I've built something good here. A life that's completely mine, without family drama, without people failing me. I have Mrs. Robinson, who's still like a mother to me. I have Mrs. Wong, who believes in me, enough to consider passing her business to me. I have Andre, who understands my boundaries and respects them. I have regular customers at the coffee shop who ask about me when I'm not there, who are genuinely interested in how I'm doing. That's my family now, the family I chose, and that feels more real and valuable than any blood connection I ever had. What happened with Nicole taught me something important about boundaries and about trusting people. She probably thought she was doing the right thing, that she was helping me heal or whatever, but what she really did was show me that even people who love you can cross lines they shouldn't cross. Since then, I've been much more careful about who I let into my life, more explicit about my boundaries, more willing to walk away from situations or people who don't respect what I need. Some would say that makes me closed off or that I have trust issues, and maybe they're right, but I prefer that to letting people make decisions about my life without my consent. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if Raymond and Eric had taken me in when I was 10, if I'd grown up with them instead of in the foster care system. It probably would have been easier in many ways. I would have had stability. I would have known my nephews if they have kids. I would have had that big family thing that so many people take for granted. But I also wonder if I would have developed the independence and resilience I have now, if I would have learned to trust myself the way I do. I don't know the answer to that, and I probably never will. What I do know is that the experiences I had, as painful as they were, made me who I am. And although sometimes I wish I could change the past, I'm not sure I'd want to change who I am now. The other day, Andre asked me if I'd ever consider responding to Raymond's letter, having that conversation, even if it was just to close that chapter. I told him I didn't know, that maybe someday, but not now. He nodded, understanding completely, and then he told me something that stuck with me. That I didn't owe anyone anything. Not even an explanation about why I chose to stay away. He was right, obviously, but hearing it from someone else made it feel more real somehow. We spent the rest of that night talking about our plans for the future, about how I wanted to eventually open my own chain of coffee shops, about how he was considering starting his own consulting company. They were big dreams, maybe unrealistic, but they were ours, and nobody could take them away from us. Now, I'm 28 years old. I'm saving to eventually buy morning grounds from Mrs. Wong. I live, alone, in a small but comfortable apartment that I decorated exactly how I wanted. And I have a routine I like. I wake up early, go to the gym, get to the coffee shop before we open, prepare everything for the day. I know most of my regular customers by name. I know their orders by heart. I ask about their lives. It's simple but satisfying. On weekends, I sometimes hang out with Andre, or go visit Mrs. Robinson, who's 72 now, but is still as active and caring as ever. She asks me once in a while about my brothers, if I've heard from them, and I tell her the truth. That yes, but I've chosen not to respond. She never judges me, just nods and tells me she trusts that I'm making the right decisions for myself. The truth is, I've found a kind of peace in my life now. A peace that doesn't come from having resolved everything or from having forgiven everyone who hurt me, but from having accepted that some things simply don't have a solution, and that's okay. Not all family stories have happy endings where everyone reconciles and hugs and promises to be better. Sometimes the happy ending is recognizing that you're better off without certain people in your life, that you've built something valuable on your own. and that you don't need anyone's approval or regret to validate your worth. That's what I've learned over these years. And although there are still days when I feel lonely or when I wonder how things would have been different, most of the time I feel grateful for the path I've traveled and for the person I've become. Yesterday, a new customer came into the coffee shop, an older guy like 50 years old, and while I was making his coffee, he asked me if I had family nearby. I told him yes, that my family worked at the coffee shop with me and lived a few blocks away, referring to Mrs. Wong and thinking about Mrs. Robinson. He nodded and smiled, saying, "That was good. That family is important." I smiled back and agreed. Because I do have family, it's just not the family I was born into. It's the family I found, and that found me along the way. And that's enough.